From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Dan Haberkost is here on the podcast, and he's here to fulfill a very specific need that we have. Small business owners from time to time get successful, and with that success requires a little bit of diversity, and maybe you want to reallocate your assets. Now, one of our favorite allocation of assets is real estate. But like my partner Matthew likes to say, they're not making any more of it. So finding real estate is difficult. Finding the right real estate is more difficult. And once you find it, finding a utility that spills off some cash flow is even more difficult. So to help us with that trifecta, we've got Dan Haberkost, who is the founder of Front Range Land. Dan, welcome to the podcast. And explain to us, what is Front Range Land?
Lou, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction. And it's simple, really. It's a big marketing funnel going direct to seller for land. We buy it at 30 to 50 cents on the dollar. Much of it we just turn around or resell, sometimes for cash, sometimes for terms. And a portion of it we'll put new construction homes on. So a couple different exit strategies there. But it's an underappreciated niche, I think, or I know. And I focus entirely on horizontally developed land. I don't touch raw land. So that's a high-level overview of the business.
What does that mean? Can you explain that for everybody listening?
Absolutely. So I see this word misused all the time, and it drives me crazy. People say raw land. There's a piece of vacant raw land. Well, there's two houses and a lot in between them that is not raw land. It's zoned. It has an allowance for probably a single family or whatever those two buildings are. It has utilities in place. Streets and roads are cut in, right? All the horizontal work, as opposed to if you just have, a farm field way out east, or like the land out east of Colorado, that is raw land oftentimes. If you want to take that and get it to the point of being able to build a house or build an apartment, there's a whole lot of work you got to do. You got to work with the county or city, and you got to spend a lot of money working with a civil engineering firm to get it to the point of being horizontally developed so that you can put in streets, roads, utilities, and eventually buildings of some sort.
So Dan, what we like about your business model is, unlike that American manifest destiny and go west and conquer, my friends, you basically said, I'm sticking to the Southeast for very strategic purposes. So you've really designated North Carolina and Florida predominantly for these assets. Can you explain to us why, please?
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm still doing new construction in Colorado because I know it well. I know the markets here. I know everyone here. But most of our business is in the Southeast simply because people are moving there. There's such an influx of people to the Southeast, and there are just endless subdivisions that were done 40, 50, 60 years ago that have really sat mostly unbuilt for years and years, where they're still priced for the middle-class individuals. And so there's just a lot of demand. That is the biggest reason I'm in the Southeast right now.
So the prices in Florida, I know because I moved here, especially for land. There was land across the street from me that sold for $2 million, then it sold for $6 million, and now it's going for $12 million, all within an 8-year span, right? Yeah. And we're not talking about a big size lot, 2 acres, not big at all, right? Yeah. So we know the housing market increases with supply and demand. How does the land market increase? Is it also supply and demand?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely cyclical, but it can be hyper local. And so an easy example would be, we got a lot in Homestead, Florida, and this is just southwest of Miami. And so you got the Everglades up against the one side, and then already built out Miami on the other side, and the ocean over here. And so there's very, very little supply, but there's huge demand because, of course, Miami's grown like crazy. And so we bought it at 45, and day one we're getting offers in the 100s, 120, a couple at 120. So that's an easy example where there's been huge growth and there's not a lot of supply, and so it pushes the price up, right? Huge demand, little supply. And that's the case in many markets in Florida. Whereas on the flip side of that, I have seen plenty of places where When the initial subdivision was done years and years ago, the lots were marketed to out-of-staters. They bought them, and the land value has decreased dramatically because there isn't that much demand. In North Carolina, there's quite a few markets like that we're doing business in.
Now, are you buying single lots at a time, just zoned for one house, or are you buying multiple lots?
Generally one at a time, infill, right? Onesies, twosies, but sometimes you run into people with 3, 4, 5.
So what is the going rate these days for a lot in Homestead?
Homestead, that's unique because there's so few lots left. So there is no real average because it's all over the place down there. But a subdivision like Palm Coast or Lehigh Acres or Palm Bay, places like that, it depends. Again, there's variation, but it could be 30, could be 60. There's a lot of middle class markets in Florida, subdivisions where you can buy them for between 20 and 100.
Dan, what other macro real estate trends are you seeing besides that voting with your feet trend to the southeast? Because rates are pretty high. I mean, from a historical perspective, they're kind of high-ish, right? They're not crazy, but they're high-ish. Or the demographics are strong, right? People still need homes. So what are you seeing at a high level?
At a high level, the fear, we're shifting back to optimism in a lot of places from fear, especially as the year goes on. I'll tell you, here in Colorado, people were worried. Denver Springs had appreciated so much the last 4 or 5 years. They expected a crash. We didn't get a crash. We got a slight decline, and there's such a lack of inventory. We're very stable and have probably, again, it's hyper-local, but decreased 0 to 8%, depending on where you're at. And that's kind of the story in a lot of parts around the country. And so I'm already watching builder confidence come back in a lot of the markets I'm in, because the existing home supply is so limited, and so people are building. So I'm building more.
So horizontal land, let's just get back to that for a second. Is that considered shovel ready, or is that a whole different process?
Well, shovel ready, as I've always seen it used and used it myself, means that the utilities are in place. The allowances, the zoning for whatever you're trying to do is there. Everything is done, and you just have to go get your permit and start building. That's how I've seen that word used.
So what areas, I know you're in the Southeast, right? You're doing some stuff in Colorado. What markets are you seeing that are undervalued, under the radar, and let's say Florida?
Under the radar, I have not found any under the radar in Florida. It is hot and it is competitive everywhere that I have been in Florida. So I don't have a good answer for you there. But I will say there was one in North Carolina that was fun for a while, and then I touched about it on the podcast, and I think others did too, and it's a little more competitive, but right at the coast of North and South Carolina, or the border where they meet on the coast, Brunswick County, North Carolina, was really hot and underappreciated, but it's pretty competitive there now. But that's kind of the thing we're all always looking for, is where is there demand, but no one's aware of it. And a lot of the markets we're in, there is a lot of demand. So here, and everyone knows, so you have to be better than your competition on the direct-to-seller side.
So what are some things that you look for in land? Give me like a 5-point list of things that you look for to fit your underwriting criteria before you actually go out and purchase the land.
Sure. Okay, so we're past the market level. We decided on a market. We're looking at specific lots, more granular. So I want to see that it is buildable. It's not worthless. You got to be careful. There are all kinds of worthless subdivisions all over the country, and you can buy and sell there, but I don't want to do that, and that could definitely get you in trouble. Look up Rattlesnake Acres in New Mexico for anyone that wants a really prime example. So I want to know it's buildable. I need to have water, sewer, and power, or the ability to put in well and septic and bring power over there. So that's a big one. I want to see, again, there's all kinds of weird...
Okay, so you being in Colorado, going into these different marketplaces, let's touch on that for a second.
Sure.
How does one find that out if they don't know and they're new to the land business?
Local experts. We rely heavily on local experts. But beyond that, usually you can confirm all this with the local. Again, it varies from place to place, whether it's the metro district or the county or the local, water, sewer, power company. Sometimes they're combined, sometimes they're separate. You can find all this out, and there's always nuances of markets to be careful of. So out here where I build in Pueblo, Colorado, soils tests are important because it affects the cost of the foundation and the septic, but it's never a yes or no. It's just a spectrum of cost. Whereas in North Carolina, the market I was just talking about, if you fail the site evaluation, they call it, the soils test, the lot's worthless. You can't put a septic tank on it for all intents and purposes. So you only find out this stuff by talking to locals. You know, there was a mountain town in Colorado where if it's exceeding a certain grade, you just can't build on it. Or, you know, in Florida, you got to watch out for turtles, certain types of endangered turtles. You find those on the lot, you're screwed. So the really nuanced stuff, you got to talk to the locals about. And I have my guys, my acquisition guys, when we go into a new market, you know, they look at a couple dozen listings, and usually that tells you right away. You'll see, you know, perk tests popping up over and over again, or, you know, survey, whatever it might be, is usually pretty clear from the listings. But then they call some agents who sell a lot of land and they say, hey, you know, what could I be missing? I'm looking at this lot. You know, here's the situation with utilities, topography, zoning. But is there anything else that could trip me up where this could be worthless, where this could be non-buildable?
When you buy a house, you usually have an inspector go in and look at the house before you buy it. Are you doing the same thing? You're going in there, you're getting an engineer, you're doing boring samplings, are you testing the soil prior to closing on the land?
No. So again, it depends on the market. There are the ones in North Carolina where you can get in trouble. I'll have a realtor go by, and a lot of times we won't touch it if there isn't a past site evaluation on file. But most markets, again, it's not always a simple dichotomy of yes or no. Sometimes it's just a little bit more expensive. And that's kind of the beauty of the infill product, where if you have two houses and a quarter-acre lot in between, the due diligence is much easier than if you're trying to go buy 50 acres in the mountains of, you know, east or west or North Carolina. It's a different product.
So what's the biggest amount of acreage that you've purchased so far to date?
I think I bought 2.55 acres in Larkspur, Colorado. I think that was the biggest ever.
Right. And how long did it take you to sell that? What's the market like?
That one's on the market right now.
Gotcha.
Yep, that's a very specific buyer. That one's not as typical, but it was a great deal. Most of the stuff we buy and sell is a quarter to half of an acre.
Quarter to half an acre. And when you say they're in subdivisions, are there already houses in these subdivisions? Multiple times?
Yep. Yeah, I don't know why, but from the 60s and 70s, there are all over the country subdivisions that were done. Florida, Colorado, North Carolina, you'll see them out west a lot, where they were done by developers. They were marketed to out-of-staters. People bought them in the Northeast. People bought them in the cold parts of the country. They kind of sold the dream of, hey, come here in the winter. And for whatever reason, many of them didn't grow or only got 10 or 15% built out, and then have sat for years and years and years. And so those sorts of subdivisions that are now growing because they're next to metros that are booming have been great sources of making income, really.
And you just gave us a wonderful lesson on American history, right? The suburbs were created by the G.I. Joes that came back from World War II.
Sure.
And American developers thought the G.I. Joes were infinite. They were just not going to stop.
Yeah.
They stopped, and they started laying roots, and they had kids, and those are called the baby boomers today.
Yeah.
Those baby boomers are now retiring, and their kids and their grandkids are hopefully starting this new trend. So that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the children and the grandchildren, all those wonderful G.I. Joes, that great generation. Yeah, how did you get into the real estate business? Because it's a tough business, and it is laden with sharks. How does a nice, clean-cut kid like you swim with sharks?
Oh, man. Well, that goes back to college. I had been running other people's businesses since I was quite young. I'd been managing other people since I was 16. And so I worked full-time in college and went to school full-time, and that wasn't a whole lot of fun. But around 20 years old, I figured, okay, I've been in business for years. I know a bit more than most 20-year-olds. How do I take this and apply this to some sort of business once I graduate school and start something, put myself ahead as an adult? And so started reading different books, listening to podcasts, and like just about everyone else, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That was like the light bulb moment. So real estate it is. Bought a house hack in Parma, Ohio, for anyone who knows where that is. But didn't want to stay in Ohio, moved to Colorado, bought another house hack. And of course, I was all, focused on the buy rentals, passive income, right? That's what everyone talks about, which is something else I could rant about, not being super legitimate. But anyways, it was around that time I figured, hey, how am I going to build a portfolio quickly? This is going way too slow. And I realized I needed to figure out a way to build an active business where I could scale my income. And so started, again, reading, listening to podcasts, going to the local real estate meetup. And I met a guy here in Colorado who had been doing land and development for the last 40 years, all over the country. And I would drive an hour south down to Pueblo, Colorado, help him in his business every weekend. and just learn from him. And eventually I started participating with him, going and getting lots for new builds. And that's where Front Range Land came from. I really just took his business model over time and implemented it myself.
Dan, this mentor of yours, what did he do wrong?
He was a little bit too all over the place. He could have gotten a lot farther, a lot faster if he had niched down a little bit more.
And how have you fixed that in your business model?
I haven't fully fixed that, but I've really, really niched down on a specific type of land, and I'm not letting myself get distracted in other assets and other strategies, because there's a million ways to make $1 million, but you can't do it doing all of them.
Now, Dan, you're obviously wildly successful, but all that glitters isn't gold. There's something quite difficult about your industry. It's capital intensive, and there are long turnaround times. How do you deal with that? Because obviously there's got to be an occasional cash flow crunch, and sometimes things don't go to closing as quickly as we would. So how do you manage that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, starting out, I just kept my personal expenses really low, and that allowed me a lot of flexibility where when I quit my job, I was 23, and I was still house hacking, so I had all the rooms in my house rented out. And that sucked, but it created a cushion and allowed me to go and start the active business. Years later, I just keep a lot of cash set aside. I still am pretty darn conservative, given, I spend a very small portion of my income. And I try to balance longer term with shorter term projects. I mean, I've been buying rentals consistently, but I just leave the cash from those in their corresponding accounts. Like the parcel in Larkspur I referenced, that's a much longer sales cycle. So doing deals like that and spec builds, which are longer, along with the really simple kind of commoditized infill quarter-acre lots that sell quickly, that's been a good balance.
Dan, would you allow us to lift a hood just a little bit, just for curiosity's sake?
Yeah.
When you're doing these transactions, are you assigning contracts, or are you going to closing, sitting on the property, marketing it, doing whatever you need to do, and then closing it again, or some sort of combination of the two?
I haven't done any assignments this year. I've done a couple dozen over the years, but almost everything we just close and resell or build on.
Any purchase money financing on your end? Does that work into your business model?
You mean selling on terms?
Yep.
Yeah. I haven't done a ton of that, lesser so as I move forward. I don't love that business model, but occasionally if lots get stuck, they're not selling, that can be a good option. Selling on terms can get things moved that otherwise would not. I still have some notes paying every month.
So Dan, as you know, our audience is small to medium-sized business owners, right? These guys are busy working all day long, right? They are masters of their craft. So there is a part of your clientele that are end users, right? Homestead and down in Florida, kind of like a Matt a couple of years ago. But for the business owner that is looking to diversify his portfolio, what sort of interesting offerings can you offer to them?
For an investor, I am taking funders for many of my land deals. To be really straightforward with you, unless you really know land, I don't consider my business a land investing business. It's just arbitrage. It's like a pawn shop for land, other than, of course, the new construction part. That's different. But if you don't really know what you're doing, I would not try and go buy land yourself as an investment. I've watched a lot of people get hurt doing that. You need to know where the big builders are going. You need to really know where the path of progress is. And again, it doesn't cash flow, so you'd want to be someone that's making a lot of money and just needing a place to put it. So honestly, for the investment purposes, I'd go buy cash flowing real estate. That's what I do, right? Front Range Land is a way to scale my income, not a way to invest.
At least 2 to 3 times a month, I'll have somebody call me, and we're in the lending space, right? And say, hey, can you help me finance land? I don't know anything about that. We always have to pass on it. Have you come across any banks that are financing land? Because they're far and few between.
It is hard. And so there are banks that if you're going to build your own house on it, they'll finance the land along with the construction, or at least a portion of it. I have found hard money lenders who will finance lots if, again, they're not raw, they're between houses, right? Horizontally developed and really good deals. But no, you're right. There is a lack of people that will finance lots. And so finding private investors, there are people creating hard money lending companies specific for land. I'm seeing that pop up, but no, there are a lack of solutions for that.
Now, the land that you're purchasing, right? You're doing 1/4 acre lots, right? Maybe 1 to 2 acres, you said would be max. What about the land that's been in this family for generations, right? They may not be parceled out like you'd want, right? For horizontally, right? But how hard is it to come across or convince somebody to sell? Let's say their family owns 100 acres. To get 50 of those. How are the big guys doing it these days? The D.R. Hortons, the Meritage, the Toll Brothers of the world.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it is important to, in any business, when you're marketing, build out your avatar. You need to know who you're speaking to. And I'd have to delve a little more into what markets we're talking about. And are these old family ranches, or are these sophisticated investors who did buy intending to sell to a builder or do the development themselves? Because you're going to have very different conversations depending on which of those. If this is an old family ranch where you want to go buy it, Banning Lewis Ranch out in eastern Colorado and do the development, that's a really different conversation. Those are people who are going to be sentimental, emotional about the ranch. They might want to see it developed a certain way. Whereas if, like my older friend I keep telling you about, he had invested in the outskirts of Vegas, which are now being developed. If you're talking to him, trying to get him to sell at a discount, that's a totally different conversation. And you would more need to just find him at the point in time where he's just done and his time is more important than his money. So the answer, as usual, is it depends who that seller is. And you need to dive into that ahead of time to make sure your marketing and sales techniques are corresponding.
So Dan, you started out in the rental game, house hacking. You're doing land now. Where do you see yourself going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Continuing the land and development business at a higher and higher level, and then continually buying old rentals at a bigger and bigger level. So really just more of the same. It's funny, the longer I do this, the more I realize success in anything is just picking something and getting better than everyone else at it. And to do that, you have to iterate consistently over the long term. And I think to your earlier question about not doing too many different things at once, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes most people make, because I am young, yet I feel old talking to a lot of people because I've been doing this for a while already. And everyone wants to jump around. You could make billions of dollars building a real estate brokerage or going after multifamily or building a title company, but you can't do all of them. So pick something and really build that out, and scaling that is what I'm working on doing, and just getting better and better at it.
I love that. And me and Luigi have that model in our business too. We know we can do anything, but we can't do everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Really what it comes down to. Hey, Dan, why don't you tell everybody how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about land, if they could reach on the socials? Why don't you let the audience know?
Dan Haberkost on Facebook, Instagram, or just danhaberkost.com.
Awesome. Dan, one question before I let you run. If you could pick one state right now, only one state that you could buy land in, which one would it be?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Now you're going to have a lot of competition after this show.
There already is, my friend, so it's all right. Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for being here, guys. That's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.